Our next interview is with Bernard Rosenthal, who is one of the multinational booksellers that we still have in our collection of booksellers. He's a man who's probably lived a lot of different places and had a lot of different bookstores. And Bernard, why don't you just start at the beginning? You know, your youth, brothers and sisters, your affiliation with all the people on your tree of book selling, etc.
Well, I'll begin by where I was born. I was born in 1920 in Munich, Germany. My father, Erwin Rosenthal, was German. My mother, Margarita Olschki, was Italian. There were 5 children, all born between 1913 and 1920. We all grew up bilingual in the family. We spoke Italian to mother and German to father. We left Germany in 1933, thank God, ahead of the worst atrocities that happened. And my older brother Albie, ended up in England and started a book business there in 1936. One sister ended up in Palestine, and another sister in England. And my brother Felix and I went to Florence. And we went from our German school in Munich to an Italian school in Florence. Then in 1938, when the fascists started the same anti-Semitic nonsense that the Nazis did, we were able to establish ourselves in Paris, and I ended my high school in an Italian high school in Paris. And from there came to the U.S. in August 1939, straight to Berkeley on the recommendation of an Italian friend of mine, and settled in Berkeley in August 1939. In 1942 I was drafted, spent 3 years in the army, came back home in 1946 with about 12 million other GIs. And I'll make this a little short, because if you want to hear all the details, we'd be here forever. But I decided to go into the book business in 1949. My father, who was a bookseller and living in Berkeley at the time, thought I was crazy, because he said there are no more good books, and the few good books that we still have are way overpriced. This was 1949. But I insisted, and I took my apprenticeship in Switzerland, in Zurich, in my father's firm called L'Art Ancien, and then got a job in New York with the Park Burnett Galleries as a cataloger in 1951. And in 1953 I was fired because I had a very bad season. It was really, times were terrible in the antiquarian book business then. And I decided that this was a sort of a wink from above, that this was a time for me to go into business for myself, and I started in New York in 1953, still considering myself an exile from California. And the business, to my own surprise, went fairly well. I decided to specialize in out-of-print scholarly books, mainly in medieval and Renaissance history. That was a time when you could still buy a book in France or in England for $5 or $6 and sell it for 35 or 50 here. And I thought that this kind of library institutional business was much safer than the way my father did it, who handled maybe 3 or 4 books a year and with 2 or 3 clients. And when that didn't work out, it was difficult.
Yes.
Then finally I was able to fulfill my original intention to move back to California in 1970. We closed shop in New York, moved to San Francisco, opened a store on Post Street, and then later on in 1989 we moved it to Berkeley, where we were living, and that's where I still am and where I still have an office. So this, in brief, is my own story. But if I started going into detail with my siblings and all that, it would take an awfully long time.
It's so, quite a book-selling tree.
And so we, a lot of relatives of mine were in the book business to start with. One great-grandfather, two grandfathers, uncles, cousins, spread from Argentina to England, Netherlands. My niece, Edith Rosenthal, just decided to retire a year or two ago in Holland. I still have a niece in England who continues her father's, my brother's business, which is Otto Haas, the music business in London. And so I grew up hearing about books and booksellers and libraries from the dinner table at home for years and years and years. And so I came into a world which was more or less familiar to me when I went into the book business.
When you were young in the trade, just starting out, who were some of the booksellers who were an influence on you, or who mentored you? Or
one of the major influence was E.P. Goldschmidt in London, who was of Dutch by birth. And his approach to books is something that I always admired, namely that he treated out-of-print reference books with the same respect that he used on incunables or medieval manuscripts, made them respectable, so to speak. And he was a great scholar, published a number of very basic books, one of them the medieval authors in their first appearance in print. Then he published a standard work on Gothic bookbindings and lectured at the Morgan Library on 15th century illustrated books. He was sort of a kind of a model. I never will equal him, but he was the major influence. Another influence was a German bookseller, Helmut Domitzlaff, in Munich, who had worked for my grandfather in Munich for a while and then went into business for himself. And he had the kinds of books that I liked, namely books that had been handled, annotated, and we shared a lot of the same ideas about early printed books, especially secular books that were used by university students and that sort of thing. And then there were a number of others. But and here in the States, I would say one of the influences was Bill Zalok, who we became good friends. And
I liked him a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so there was quite a crowd. Then there was Otto Ranchberg, Harry Lubrecht of the great company in what were they called? I forget now. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Memory is beginning to be a problem. So there were a lot of people who, and then of course my main influence, I should mention, was Alfred Frauendorfer. He was a manager of the firm in Zurich, of my father's firm, manager of L'Arancien, who taught me practically everything. He taught me who Brunet was and how to look up things. And he taught me almost too much of a Teutonics type of cataloging. If you didn't mention 12 or 15 reference books, forget it. And I've spent many, many years trying to unlearn what the master taught me, which is only natural.
What was your transition or non-transition into the world of computers? Are you a computer person?
Well, I am willy-nilly, but I bought a computer fairly early in the late 80s, while my wife Ruth, who, by the way, is my collaborator and has worked with me for many, many years, she said she would never touch a computer and practically divorced me if I ever bought one. So I waited until she was abroad in Europe, and while she was gone, I bought a computer. And the inevitable happened. She loved it.
Yeah, of course, of course,
and still does. And she's so we adapted the computer, but I don't use the internet, for instance. I don't have a website. I think at my age it would be kind of ridiculous to start a website. And I think it's a kind of a snobbishness that the public begins to appreciate when you can tell them that your books are not on the web.
Well, yeah.
And it makes you a little more exclusive, maybe.
Yeah.
And so
that's a selling point.
And I don't buy anything on the internet. I just don't like it. I just like to get catalogs and read them. And but I do use the internet a lot for reference.
Yeah.
And I sold my reference library 2.5 years ago, and I thought I would be absolutely terribly miss it, but I've learned to do without it.
Did you sell it at auction, or did you sell it to
I sold it to my colleague Ian Jackson.
Oh, right. Yes, I know Ian.
And who bought it at a time when these things were already very difficult to sell, as we all know.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is a chapter that should still be written in the history of the Antiquarian book, is the enormous prices of reference books in the post-war period, which was then slowly lowered by the availability of reprints, and now, of course, tends towards zero because of the internet.
Practically anything that you want to use is available online.
And sometimes even better.
Yeah. I mean, if we had Google 35 years ago, life would have been a lot easier when you think about it, looking up people.
Right. The difference is, of course, that somebody pointed out to me recently that when you the internet is fine for looking up an individual book, but if you open this item, let's say in the NUC or the British Museum catalog, you get it in context next to all its other editions and all the other works of the author, and that is still an advantage that the book has.
Tremendous. It's a tremendous way to acquire information.
It is,
especially for someone who doesn't have a reference library anymore.
That's right. Yes. So anyway, I've managed to go on, but of course I now work on a very reduced basis, and I am an emeritus in the ABAA, so I no longer participate in the day-to-day business, and I also don't get all the announcements, and I'm also not all that interested. So
you have other things to be concerned about. Sitting where you're sitting after being in the trade for all those years, what do you think the future of the book trade is? The antiquarian book trade.
I think it's going to be great.
You think so?
I think there will always be people collecting books, and of course, if there are no more medieval manuscripts or no more incunables, okay, they collect first editions of authors that aren't born yet, and they just have to adapt. But I think that the instinct of collecting will continue, and if you deal in, let's say, modern American first or something like that, I think the future looks good to me.
When you were an active bookseller, how many catalogs did you put out a year, or was it an annual thing?
Not very regular. I put out, over my 60-year career, I put out maybe about 35 catalogs and maybe 100 lists. My major catalog, which was to be catalog 34, on which I worked something like 15 years, was a catalog of my collection of annotated books, which was bought en bloc by Yale University in 1997, and was then published by them in a very handsome format. And after that, I just didn't do much in the way of catalogs except informal lists or personal quotes to clients or colleagues.
If a young person came to you today and said, "Mr. Rosenthal, I'm thinking about being a bookseller. What are the important things I need to do, or I need to know, or I need to have?"
Know your stuff and pay your bills. I would say you have to have, in my opinion, it helps to have in some field a very specialized, deep knowledge. And I think paying your bills promptly, I'm not saying this, paying your bills promptly is very, very important. Make friends with your colleagues. And I would also say that you should join something like the Bibliographic Society of America or the American Antiquarian Society, and you should be active in your local libraries by joining a Friends of the Library groups or something of that sort. And so, becoming part of the larger book community. And as a matter of fact, I would almost make it a condition for joining the ABAA. I know I'd be pilloried for that, that you can only join if you're a member of the Bibliographic Society of America and of at least one library support group. But
well, you'll probably be very much in the minority.
Yes.
As things stand now, the ABAA is looking for members simply because the membership is draining.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've gone from a high point of over 500 5 or 6 years ago, and we're down to like 430 or 435. And that's a large number to be lacking.
It certainly is.
And nothing coming up the other way.
When I was president from 68 to 70, I think we were about 260 or something like that. Which was, a pre-cell phone, pre-TV, not pre-TV, but almost a period. And this was a large membership. Everything had to be handled by postcards and letters.
Yeah, I mean,
no email.
Yeah, I remember one of the things we used to do is we used to send out a postcard to every member that they could use their postcards to get into a book fair free. Yeah. So I said, this is kind of silly. Why don't we just get everybody a membership card and let them show the membership card, and we'll save all that postage. Everybody looked around and said, why didn't I think of that? It was the simplest of ideas. The simplest of ideas, and it just seems to go over. And it was funny because when I asked a particular New England bookseller the question about what a young bookseller should have, his first and only comment was, own your own building. Which, if you think about it, is pretty impressive.
Well, owning a building, yes, that's been often said, but most booksellers, when they start, can't afford a building.
Absolutely.
Right, yes.
There are some who along the way get one.
Yeah, right.
But it's an important piece of advice, I would think.
Yes,
when you're able to get your own building.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're always going to be
look at Argosy in New York, or Bob Fleck.
Well, Argosy.
He started with a building. Bob, I read the interview. I saw the interview you did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Argosy, that building is probably worth 10 times what their inventory is, and where the location is. It's just amazing. Yeah. I want to ask you a couple of quick questions before we say goodbye. This is a question that you may have a perspective on. Who do you consider some of the great booksellers in our day today, and who you think are some of the rising stars, some of the younger people who you think are going to make it?
It's a little tricky because when I talk about the biggest booksellers, I have some ideas, but to me, Bill Reese is undoubtedly he's obviously a competitor of yours, but
I think he's the greatest bookseller in America today.
We agree.
Without any question.
And and then among the younger ones, I think I have a great deal of respect for people like Bruce McKittrick, who has a very fresh way of looking at books. And although he knows the traditional tools of bibliography, he manages to inject a new viewpoint, generally a humorous one. And that's another advice I would give. Don't take yourself too seriously.
Right.
Let's also have fun.
I've always said if it's not fun, you shouldn't be doing it.
Exactly. And among the other younger ones, I just don't know all that many. But I think when I go to book fairs, I'm always pleasantly surprised to see so many younger people.
Yeah.
But it's too bad about the membership. Maybe you should charge a little less.
Well, in order to get what we have to get done, that's what we have to charge. I mean, the internet presence alone for our search engine is costing a good deal of money. And then we have employees. We have a legal person who gets too much money per hour. But these are all expenses that we can't avoid.
Right.
And having headquarters in New York is not a cheap situation.
Exactly. I don't want to start reminiscing, but when I was president from 1968 to 70, we had one part-time employee, and every time when we really needed her for the annual meeting, she'd go into hysterics.
Right.
And that's all we had. And there was a lawyer who was a book collector and did everything for nothing. Of course, there wasn't much for him to do.
Right.
But every once in a while, we'd give him a book. So that's right.
Well, we had. I remember when I took office as the president, Janice Farina, 20 minutes after she got a letter from me saying that I had been elected the president, sent her letter of resignation. So there we were, without anybody in the office.
Let's see, when was your presidency?
1988 to 1990.
Oh yeah, right.
And you know, thank God for Ellen Schreiber.
Yeah.
She stepped right in and hired somebody who was. She hired Leanne. Thomas, who has been with us for a long time until just recently when she retired.
Right.
But I was absolutely dumbfounded. I didn't know what the heck to do. There I am. I just took over the presidency and I have nobody to work with.
Oh, you never had to work with Anne Spiegler. She was
no. Oh. She was in the sugar.
She was. She certainly was. But she was good-hearted, and she did whatever she was able to do. But as I said, when you really needed her, she tended to be a bit difficult to handle, shall we say. Yeah.
So you're going to continue fooling around with books?
Well, yes, touch wood. I don't buy very much, but I do have a nice little inventory. And occasionally, when I can afford it now, and this, thank God, has happened several times lately, I buy books because I just like them and I always wanted to have them. And if I don't get them now, I never will. So, so I'll go on.
Okay, great. Thanks for the interview.
Well, thank you.
It was great. I feel like I've been talking to a legend.
Well, we go back a long way.
I know. And I appreciate you coming in and taking the time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.